This is the first sort of informal info session we're doing. We're calling it Meet a Student. Today we have Karl Lingiah. He's one of our students at Launch School. He is almost wrapping up the back end. Is that right, Karl?
Yeah, near the end of, prepping for 179 assessment. So still got that to do, and then 180. So yeah, near the end of the back end.
Right, near the end of the back end. He's been with us for a while, and he has a very, I think, interesting story. Perhaps pretty typical, but still interesting nonetheless. And I thought it'd be nice for him to share his story with everybody here, and he was kind enough to agree to it. So we'll just start off with some background and introduction. And for those of you on this webinar, feel free to ask questions along the way in the chat box. I'll be looking at them. And so I've asked Karl to not respond directly to questions. So what I'll do is I'll pick out questions here and there and ask them to Karl on your behalf, and he will answer the questions that I asked directly. But feel free to drop notes in there, and any we can take the conversation any directions you guys want to explore. So feel free to just drop notes in there. So Karl, do you want to maybe just start off with a little bit of introduction and background about yourself?
Yeah, so as Chris said, my name's Karl. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm based in the UK. And I've been at Launch School for maybe 9-10 months now, which might seem like quite a long time, but I guess there's a particular reason for that, which is the start of my Launch School journey. I was working full-time and studying at the same time, part-time, so progress during that period was maybe a little bit slower. And I'm now studying full-time with Launch School for the past maybe 2 months to just over 2 months, yeah.
Yeah, do you want to talk about maybe even sort of your initial path to finding programming, sort of taking it way back a little bit?
Yeah, way back. So I've always had, like, maybe the past kind of 7, 8, maybe longer years, I've had an interest in kind of web development from a front end point of view. So I've kind of dabbled with HTML and CSS for quite a while, mainly kind of helping friends out and building kind of.
And this was years ago. This is like over 5 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah, this is a long time ago. So, and
so what's your background? Do you have like professional training in not in programming, I assume?
No, so like going way back. So my background's in the arts really. So I studied a literature degree. Which was very different, I guess, from programming, but that was the original path I was on, and had kind of various different jobs in different sectors over the past kind of 10, 15 years. And eventually kind of maybe over the past kind of 5 to 8 years, worked in areas related to IT, but not necessarily programming. So doing maybe configuration of different systems, like SaaS systems, things like that, and kind of moving more towards programming and kind of getting more and more interested in it, until a point where in my previous job there was an objective, I guess, to bring web development in-house. So we had like a Ruby on Rails app that we wanted to bring support for that in-house, and that was the main objective behind me learning programming. Was a work-based objective. So this was something that was supported by my employer at the time. So that was quite a specific thing, a specific reason that I kind of chose LS as well, because the app was a Rails.
So initially, it wasn't necessarily to transition career. I think, based on what you're saying, it seems like you were already sort of in a company and doing peripherally technical roles, not software development per se, but sort of around the edges of that. There's a lot of roles that are kind of technical, but not necessarily 100% development. And it sounds like you were in one of those roles. And initially, you wanted to get into software development to maybe transition to a development role? Is that right?
I wanted to transition. It was something that
within
was
the company.
A personal objective for me. I wanted to transition into software development, but also something that is an objective for the company at the time. They wanted to bring this support for this app in-house. And so me learning web development or improving my web development skills was part of that business objective, I guess.
Yeah. And I noticed this a lot in a lot of students, where there's this initial exploration phase, right? And that initial exploration phase can last a really long time, months and often years. And it sounds like your exploration phase was sort of that role where you were in the peripherally technical role, and the catalyzing moment, if you will, is sort of when you had this project come in and you say, hey, look, I can do this, and I can maybe now study to become a software developer.
Yeah, sure. So there's like an opportunity that presented itself, but it in the format of something that I kind of wanted to do anyway. So it's something that I kind of pushed for, I guess, in a sense of like, yeah, let's do this then because it would be great for me and it would be good for the company as well. So that was the driving force. But like you say, it was something I've been moving towards over the past few years.
I noticed that a lot in terms of how, and you've been a very good student at Launch School, and I think part of the reason is because you had been exploring or dabbling for years, right, beforehand. So it's not that perhaps you can say you have zero programming experience, but definitely not zero experience, period.
Yeah,
right?
I think I had that interest, but it was always very so the knowledge that I've acquired over the years, like the front end stuff, was in a very non-structured way. So it's like learning a little bit of HTML here and some CSS, doing some tutorials online, like building a website for a friend, something like that. And it was like really, really not structured. Like I didn't have a clear path to follow in terms of learning.
Right, certainly, yeah. And I think that's natural. When you learn anything, I think the first phase of learning is always sort of this exploration or play-oriented phase, right? And it's hard to just get into the grind of the studying immediately. And I think a lot of people kind of don't realize that, or they realize it, but they sort of forget that part and jump straight to the study, and it becomes overwhelming very quickly, right? So I think it's important to understand that there's a first phase there before you get into something like Launch School, which is really study oriented, right? Where we're really going to force you to memorize things and study things. It's not it's the next step, if you will.
It is.
And I also noticed that another sort of set of people who do really well at Launch School are people who have learned something really to depth already, like a trained musician, or they went to graduate school or something like that, where they understand there's this play phase or explore phase first, but they quickly get through it. They're sort of eager for more structure. They're eager for more sort of studying and learning, right? That's another, I think, profile that does really well at something like Launch School, which is, again, more rigorous, I think, more formal and structured and rigorous. Let me take a step back, Karl, for 1 second and ask you, when you were sort of ready to take that step of becoming more serious and learning in a more structured way, how did you come across Launch School? Like I think that's a journey that a lot of potential students would be interested in. How did you evaluate the various training programs, but also perhaps, the idea of learning on your own? How was that?
Okay, so I did quite a bit of research actually. I spent, I'd say at least a few weeks, maybe even a couple of months, researching different options and looking at what was available. And I had certain criteria that I was looking at. And one of them was like, as I say, I was working full time at the time, so it had to be a program that allowed me to continue working full time. So it had to be, I guess, self-paced and something that I could do remotely. So Launch School definitely ticked both of those boxes. But I think once I found it as well, I just was really impressed by just the ethos, like the talk of the curriculum was really deep as well. I thought that was a real plus, and the idea of learning things to that kind of depth. Whereas a lot of the other programs I looked at, when you looked at the curriculum, it didn't really look as if it went to the same level of depth. So that's something that I was really impressed with. And they were the main factors really in making my decision.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because it's hard to convey depth, right? So a lot of people convey depth with more topics, which is really not, and I think in the early stages, that's what people look at, right? They say, oh, you have 100 topics, and this program has 50 topics. And so 100 is more depth than 50. But I actually think that's not how I think about depth, right? Because you can cover more topics more shallow, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's not, to me, depth. Like, more topics, not depth. The way I think about depth is, if I give you a book on anything, let's say Ruby, right, or introduction to programming or JavaScript, and I gave it to 10 people, these 10 people will come back with varying degrees of depth in terms of their understanding of the material in the book. So it is, I think, important to try to think about depth from not the number of topics perspective, but how deeply do you get into that one topic, right? One topic. And so
that's quite hard to judge when you're not familiar with the topics as well. I
exactly.
think you really need to do some research and
exactly. It's very difficult, I think, in the beginning phases, right? And so, and I believe that is the number one difference between people who force themselves to learn to depth versus people who sort of cover a wide variety of topics very shallowly. And so the way we do it is through assessments, of course, right? At launch school, our assessments are extraordinarily difficult in that we ask you for an extreme level of precision and depth, and you simply can't pass an assessment if you don't spend the time to memorize and to study and to do all these things that is required. We also suffer from this problem in that how do we convey this idea to beginners? Because what's impressive later on is really not how many topics you know a little bit about, right? But how many topics do you have true mastery of? And from there, it's almost like if I were to hire somebody, I would want somebody to have full competency in a few things, because then I can give them tasks related to those few things and then build out from there. As opposed to if you say, oh, I know like TDD, building microservices, Python and Scala and Ruby and JavaScript, but I know none of them well, right? I can't give you a task to do as an employer, for example. So back to your journey, Karl. I know that when you first came to launch school, you didn't necessarily, I think you, like a lot of students in launch school actually, right? You like the idea of learning to mastery and you like the general philosophy, but the buy-in isn't 100%, right? Because there's this idea of like, well, I get the sort of goal here, but for me, I have this other goal that I'm just going to navigate around. Can you talk about that a little bit? Your mindset coming in?
I think it's really natural to, like you say, I was really interested in the idea of learning things to depth and to mastery, but I still had this idea in the back of my mind, I guess, that, okay, I want to do this program in a certain amount of time. I guess I had some outside pressures as well there. One of them was that my employer at the time was funding the program, and they'd agreed a certain amount of funding, like I think it was a year. So I was like, in my head, I was like, right, I've got to complete this in a year. And then once you've got that overall timescale, you kind of break that down and go, okay, so I've got to do this portion in a month, then another month for this, and another month for this bit. And you start putting time-based goals on completion of different parts. So I think that's almost kind of hinders learning and to mastery in a way, because you kind of like, right, I need to finish this by the end of the week, or I need to finish this by the end of the month. So you maybe don't go as deep as you feel you need to in certain topics. If you haven't got that time-based pressure, you maybe kind of reread something or go deeper into a subject around it and do some more exploration, try things out, or maybe go back and repeat a certain bit of learning just to drill it in a bit more.
Right. Yeah.
And I didn't have that. I don't think I had that at the start. I had this kind of idea that, right, I finished this bit, I'm going to go on to the next part, and then I'm going to move through in this very kind of ordered fashion.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because when people, one of the things, as you said, that attracts people to launch school is the number of topics that we have, right? So if you look at how many courses we have, you're just like, wow, this is amazing, right? And we're a very old program. So launch school's not launch school. The manifestation is new, but we've been doing this for over 4 years now, and so we have a lot of content. We didn't just wake up yesterday and say, hey, let's build a training program and create lots of content. This has been under production for years and years and years. So we don't lack for content. So when people come, they say, oh, this is great, I get to learn all these things. However, as you just said, it is very detrimental in the early stages to count the number of topics you want to learn and then try to backfill it in a time frame.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, your first month in, you're saying, I'm not able to get through this content in 1 month. I will not finish, according to my pace in the time frame that I've allotted. So I think that is...
And then you feel like getting behind, and that adds more pressure
Exactly, yeah.
like it gets up and it affects your learning.
Right. 1 month in already you're
Uh,
behind. That's what it feels like, right?
yeah, yeah,
And that's extremely detrimental, brings a lot of anxiety. And that's probably the number one issue that I see with regard to learning to mastery, right? Is this idea of time-based pressure, time-based anxiety that everybody has. So, and I think
mm,
that's the hardest thing to overcome. I think a lot of people don't, right? A lot of people don't overcome it. So how do you, and you were one of the people that I think, as I talked to and worked with you for the last several months, I've noticed this shift in
yeah,
the way that you approach learning, the way that you're approaching things. Can you talk about that, transition in
yeah.
the way you're thinking about things?
So I think there were a few different elements to that kind of change in thinking. One of them was one day in Slack. I think it might have been you that recommended the Mastery by George Leonard book to read. So I got that and read that book, and I think that's actually recommended in the prep course now. It's actually part of the prep course. So yeah, when I first started, that wasn't in the prep course, so I kind of read that maybe partway through my launch school journey. And that's a great book that really explains things in detail in terms of what a mastery-based approach is, which I kind of I had this idea of what it was, but it was a little bit fuzzy. So that really opened my eyes, I think. The second part of it was kind of my objectives changed as well. So for various reasons, I kind of started studying full-time, like I left my job, but wanted to continue with launch school. So that kind of immediately removed an outside pressure, which was this time-based thing that I had to finish within a year. So that was quite a big decision as well. I spent a little while thinking about what I wanted to do with that, but ultimately I decided I wanted to continue with the program and put things in place so that I can continue. That was part of the shift as well. That was my main focus now, that I wanted to study at launch school and focus on that. And I didn't have a particular time frame that I needed to do it in. So that was a big part of the shift, I think.
Yeah, that's right. And now that might introduce the other piece, the other part of the pressure that I see in a lot of students. One is time, the other is finances, right? So if you left your job and all that, what I usually recommend to people is you have to make sure that you have the finances, right, to live,
Sure.
right, to pay your rent, obviously pay your tuition at launch school and not feel financial pressure, right? And so a lot of people say, well, look, I can't just do this forever. And so I totally understand that, but you have to address that, right? So launch school, what I usually say is in the long-term investment bucket, right? It's not, we're not asking you to do anything unnatural, right? But it has to be, you have to be sustainable. The number one success factor at launch school, to be successful at launch school, is consistency. And how do you work consistently is stability, right? So to have stability in your life, you have to remove anxiety and stress, right? So time stress, anxiety, financial stress and anxiety. So
there's all these outside pressures that, the more you can minimize them, the better you're going to be able to learn, I think, because
definitely.
Otherwise, those kind of things are always on your mind, and you think, like, when you're studying, you think, right, I need to do this by the end of the day, and then, like, all these time pressures come in.
Right. Right. And that's what I see all the time. It's usually not like technical problems we can easily address. We'll say, hey, it looks like you're having a problem here. Do some exercises on this, or read this book on this topic. I think it's really good. It'll help you. And usually what you hear is some resistance. Some people say, well, why am I going to read that book? It's going to cost me another month to do that. It's like, yeah, but you're going to know it so much better, right? It's sort of like, if you really want to learn this well, as a coach or as a mentor or as an instructor, right? I really want you to learn it well. You should go and consume that content. And so there's a little bit of friction whenever you have this financial or time pressure, right? Like I'm not going to do that. And I think to some degree people are kind of looking for this end-to-end program with a magical transformation, right?
Yeah.
And not realizing that really skills is what you're trying to get, right? And so if it is to do 100 exercises or read a book, that's the right thing to do if you care about developing your skills.
Absolutely. And I think that the wrong way to approach a program like this is to treat it as a tick box exercise. So like you've got all these lessons, and like when you finish one, it's like you get a little tick next to it saying it's done. But that shouldn't be the aim. Like your aim shouldn't be to get through these and get all the green ticks on the right hand side. It should be about what the journey is and what you're learning within those lessons.
Right. Yeah.
Not finishing, getting the tick.
And I think that's the biggest difference between a mastery-focused learning environment versus a time-based one or a credential-based one, right? Is that in a credential-based one, like high school or college, it's almost normal to ask, like, what's the easiest way around this? Because the artifact at the end of that program is a diploma, right, or a GPA. Mm-hmm. And so you don't want a low GPA. You're still getting the diploma. So it's almost normal to say which professors are difficult or which courses are difficult. Let me just kind of, navigate myself around them so that I can still have a high GPA. At the end of the day, that's what I'm taking to get a job. Law school doesn't issue diplomas. At the end of the day, the artifact you're going to take out of law school is a skill set, is knowledge, and that's what you're going to present to employers. So here at law school, we don't want you to avoid difficult problems, right? I get emails sometimes saying, hey, what do I really have to do this? It's kind of hard. and so the question behind the question is almost like, can I finish without doing the hard problems? So the answer is yes, but the goal is not finishing, right? The goal is to improve yourself and get better. That's the key. So you have to almost think about this differently in a mastery-based environment than you would approach, a credential-based environment or a time-based teaching environment where you're just trying to get through as opposed to learning, right? That's the key. And I feel like there's not many programs that focus on mastery. The analogous company or program I usually think about is something like a karate or a taekwondo place where you're trying to get a black belt. Like that's the goal, getting a black belt. So it's not, you wouldn't walk in the door and say, can I get a black belt? Or you say, can I get a black belt? And the answer is, yeah, sure. Well, I have 3 months. It's like, well, then in that case, maybe not, right? And you wouldn't ask the question of, do I really have to jump on that? If you say, well, you have to, you're trying to get a black belt, you're trying to impress the judges, you're trying to pass these really rigorous and difficult examinations. And also there's a competition that you want to win. There's maybe a match, right, that you're going to participate in. I think when you think of this as a match, right, later on, you wouldn't say, do I have to do this? Because you say, well, I'm going to lose the match, right? And in a similar way, getting a job is a competitive match. That's the mindset. That's the mental model I think people should have. It's not you get stamped as, qualified at the end. You get a stamp. And then you present the stamp to an employer, and that's how you're going to get a job. That's not it, right? It is a competitive match, competitive process at the end here. And you're competing against other really, really top candidates for the top jobs. So, you never want to say, can I avoid this difficult problem?
Yeah. I'd go even further than that as well, actually. It's like getting the job is kind of a first step almost, after finishing the program. It's like you then keep moving forward. And the way you do that is by, continually improving your skills and you carry on learning. And I think one of the things that I've learned in this program is not just about learning the syntax and the content about programming, but also kind of learning how to learn as well, like improving study habits. And by spending the time to do that kind of stays with you then moving forward.
Right, exactly. I think that's exactly right. It's not even the goal here isn't to sneak in the back door, hack the interview process or something like that. It's just to be a good programmer, period. Because you're not going to enjoy your day-to-day work if deep down inside you know that you don't know what's going on, but somehow you were able to get through the interview, get into the company through the back door. Your colleagues are going to detect that immediately, and you're not going to enjoy work. A very important key attribute to keep in mind that the goal here, yeah, you're right. It's not even a job; it's a career, right? You're going to grow in your career. How are you going to do that? There's no trick here, right? There's no magic trick. It just takes one foot in front of the other over a long period of time.
Yeah.
Great. So I got a few questions here, Karl. So one says, how long have you been at launch school and how far are you in the curriculum? I think we already talked about this. Do you want to just kind of say it real quick?
Can I cover that? Yes, like about 9 to 10 months now, I guess. I'm just kind of near the end of the back end portion, just prepping for 179 assessment.
Right. And I think that might be interesting for people to realize. 9 to 10 months, and you're less than halfway through.
Sure. I suppose the context around that is like for a lot of that I was working full time, so maybe I would imagine I would have moved quicker if I'd been studying full time for the whole.
Right. And that's shocking for, I think, sometimes for people to hear. It's like, oh my gosh, 9 to 10 months, and you're less, I would say you're around 1/3, maybe just
Yeah.
under 1/3 of the way through. And I think for some people that's a little bit, jarring. But I think one thing to realize is, where are we going, right? So learning to program is not a fixed bar that every program goes to. We're climbing an extremely high mountain because people claim, at least, right? They want a great job at the end, right? They want a career at the end, career preparation. It's a long journey, right? People get, programmers get paid a lot of money for a reason. It's not, I think most people can do it. Most people have the intellectual capacity to do it. What's missing is really this patience of learning things well, right? That's really what's missing from most people.
I think I've been spending more time where I feel it's beneficial. Like with 170, for example, I've kind of almost gone through it twice, the material, because I found that sometimes when you first move through some content and then you reread it again a second time, you understand it in a different and much clearer way. So sometimes it's beneficial to kind of almost go through some of the material twice. I shouldn't be afraid to go back, I don't think, to clarify concepts and ideas.
Absolutely. And I feel like this is the key between people who know how to learn versus people who are just trying to get through. I talk to students all day, every day, and I see their assessments. And what I see on the performance on the assessments is not necessarily prior experience, but it's how people approach learning, how serious they are. So, for example, just the other day, I talked to somebody who aced one of the assessments, and she had no prior programming background previously from launch school. And I asked her how she was able to do this. And she said, well, I did the course 3 times, right? I read the book 3 times and I took notes. And then I took a break because she had some personal issues going on. And then she came back, read the book again, took notes again as if it was approaching it for the first time. And so it's that level of seriousness, right? And that is the difference, right? Study habits is the difference. Like I said, I can give 10 people a book to read and then give these 10 people an assessment. And, you can expect that some people get A's and some people get B's and some people get C's. Basically, what we're doing is we're holding the bar at an A, right? We're saying you cannot move forward unless you get an A. And if you get a B or you get a C, we'll give you some feedback. We'll say, hey, it looks like, you're strong here and weak there and you should do this and that. So I feel like that's really it in terms of what we do. There's really nothing more magical than that. We force you to study. I've got another question here, Karl. How many hours do you spend on launch school per week?
Okay, so when I first started, I was working full time, so I was spending probably about between 10 and 15 hours. And then over the past couple of months since I've been studying full time, it's probably kind of somewhere between 15 and 25 hours a week. Maybe for the past couple of weeks, I've not quite been hitting that, but yeah, it's usually around that. Yeah,
that sounds pretty good. I would say I usually recommend around that. Less than 10 hours a week, I almost think that you should do exercises just to keep fresh instead of trying to make progress. If it's less than 10 hours, then just keep fresh. That's it. Here's another question. I admire your journey so far. Any tips for those of us thinking about starting?
I'd say one of the most important things is to be consistent. So I guess everyone's circumstances will be different. Like some people will be studying full time, some people might be studying part time, but the consistency is the key. So have like a set hours that you always see. Like maybe that'll be kind of first thing in the morning for like 3 or 4 hours. That's your fixed time every day that you study your material, and stick to that every day. Like don't try and just fit things in around the rest of your life. Like commit to doing like a certain number of hours every week and kind of try and stick to that as much as possible.
Yeah,
and stick to the schedule.
That's really good. I have a tip here for people is that have a default study calendar. And I think if let's say you work normally 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, if somebody sent you a text and said, hey, let's go see a movie at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, you might say, are you crazy? Why are you inviting me to a movie during my workday? Right? I think you have to have a similar study schedule where the default task is studying. And if somebody were to send you a text, your response is, are you crazy? This is my study time, right? That should be the response. If you're always having to make a choice, right? If you're working and you set aside study time from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. every day, but if every time somebody asks you, do you want to see a movie? Do you want to go out to eat? Do you want to watch Game of Thrones or something like that? And there's a decision point to make in your head. at some point you're going to lose, right? You're going to
Sure.
maybe one day you'll say, yeah, I'll study. That's good.
Yeah,
Next day you'll
especially if
say,
you're kind of struggling at that point with some material, you don't quite understand it, and it's like, oh, this is hard. Okay, I'm going to go to see a movie. Like,
right,
yeah,
exactly.
get this, I'll do it tomorrow.
And that's the key
Like,
part. When things get hard is when you got to dig down, right? When you have to dig
yeah,
deep and focus. So it's very easy, you're right, to if you would never say, yeah, I'll leave work to watch a movie at 2 p.m. But, if it's 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. on a weekday, you might say, yeah, okay, I can put this off. So have a default calendar that you cannot compromise on. Definitely build in time for leisure activity. Don't burn out. Consistency is key, not maximum effort. Maximum effort is not key, right? Because
yeah,
that, by definition of the word maximum, it means you're at your boundary, and that's not sustainable. Don't max yourself out. It's like if you're climbing a very high mountain, sprinting for a while is not really going to help you in the long run, right? So one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other. Build in time for rest.
yeah. Pacing yourself is really important, I think.
Right, exactly.
And keeping it consistent. And the other thing I'd say that I've already mentioned is don't be afraid to go back over material. Don't think that's failure. Like that, it's part of the process. So like when you get to when you get to the end of the topic, maybe go back to start, reread it, because like I said before, you might understand it differently, be more in a clearer way.
Okay, and then I'll probably end it here with this last question: is how confident are you in the launch school program? Do you feel it will adequately prepare you for a job afterwards?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty confident that that's gonna prepare, like probably even over prepare me. I guess we need to maybe contextualize like what people understand by a job, right? Because I could probably go out and get a job tomorrow, right? So, but it might not be the job that I want. I think we talked about this before, where it's this kind of like the bar's quite low in terms of entry level, right? So, a lot of people could do part of the course and go out and get a job, but that's not really what I'm aiming for. I guess I want to be in a position where I can maybe kind of pick and choose what jobs I want to do, and have more control over that. Which I think is kind of what this journey is moving towards, that kind of being a well-rounded and good quality developer.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think two thoughts here. One is you don't have to wait till the end, right? As you're sort of going through this journey, you should feel yourself getting more and more proficient in the material. And it's very, very common for people to get jobs throughout the program. This is why getting a job is really uninteresting in our field, because as you alluded to, a job is not a bar, right? It's not like being a medical doctor where, at least in the United States, there's a very strict bar for, in 1 second you're not an MD, the next second you are an MD. You're licensed to some degree. In programming, there is no such thing, right? You can read a book and call yourself a programmer, and maybe even get a job, not a great one, doing some light programming. The idea at launch school is not that, right? The idea is definitely to aim for a very, very high-end job, and as you said, get you to a place where you can pick and choose. And the journey to that place looks very different from the journey to a low-end job. You might say, well, it's linear, right? The journey to a low-end job is on the way. It's actually not. And the way to think about this is preparation. What do you do your first few months if you know that you have this really long journey to go on? You prepare. You prepare very rigorously, and you don't, you might just doing like stretching and things like that. You wouldn't even, going back to sort of the karate analogy, right? You wouldn't even do any combat, just stretching and maybe getting in shape, because you know that this journey is going to be a multi-year journey. But if you say, well, I have this low-end goal. I'm not trying to be like a black belt or anything. I just want to go and compete with this match over here. That's all I care about, and I have 3 months. I almost think that's a completely different journey. Sure. Right? That's a different thing. You wouldn't spend 2 months, stretching and getting in shape. You just, do the best you can and go towards that direction, right? So I think for launch, if you're interested in launch school, I think it's really important to understand that, and understand that the journey to a low-end job is different from a journey to a high-end job. They're not necessarily on the same path. The preparation is very, very different. And so you're going to feel it. I think it's hard, right? It's hard to get there. I think that's it for today. Thanks for taking the time, Karl.
No problem.
If anybody on the webinar here has any follow-up questions, I know I didn't get to a lot of the questions. Sorry about that. Some of the questions were not related to Karl specifically. Feel free to email hello@launchschool.com. We reply to every email. So if you have any questions like that, definitely email in, especially pertaining to your specific situation. Hopefully this was helpful. And if it was, maybe we'll do more of these. So thanks a lot, Karl.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Have a good day, everybody.